Okay, hey guys, welcome back. In the last episode of Badly Designed Abilities, I made a poll asking if you want to see a part 3, and the response was, unsurprisingly, overwhelmingly in favor of yes. This will also be the last one of its kind, either forever or for a very long time, because while it's really fun to talk about this kind of stuff, as mentioned before, I try not to rehash the same topic too often since I want to try to keep my videos unique and special. Maybe in the future we'll think of something else more fun to go over. Anyways, if you're joining me for the very first time, I suggest you watch episodes 1 and 2 after you're done with this one, but for the time being, time to go over some more of League's worst abilities with Badly Designed Abilities Part 3. Really quickly though, I want to spend a moment to shout out today's sponsor, U.GG. Almost all of you should know by now it's one of the premier tier list platforms and my personal favorite one to use, but they also have a desktop application for Overwolf now. So alongside the normal stuff from their website, they have all sorts of different overlays for Champ Select, in-game, and post-game. Champ Select lets you search up player statistics for your team, and as per usual, you get to set builds and runes for whatever champion you're gonna play. In-game, you have a host of different data panels like player card and info, or in-game performance benchmarks as the game progresses. Also, they have a few conveniences. Jungle timers are one of them. That way you get to track when things are about to respawn, even more than just Dragon, Baron, and Red and Blue buffs. Once the game is over, you get your post-game metrics including LP earned per champion and match, so you know which champions you do best on and how you're doing in terms of MMR. I'm a huge fan of U.GG myself. I have their tier list bookmarked whenever I need to look up matchups or whatever champion I should be banning, so if you want to make use of it as well, head on over to the link on screen, which is also in the description. But thanks again to U.GG for sponsoring the video. So unlike the first two episodes where I more or less just went through the list of champions and singled out abilities that transgress on an aspect of proper champion design, for today's video, I curated things a bit more thoroughly. Quick disclaimer, this video is largely based on perspective. In theory, certain things may be seen as objectively detrimental for League's balance or experience, but depending on what sort of mindset you have about the game, that can change from one person to another. As an example, let's bring up Sinja's Poison Trail, an ability that leaves behind a trail of gas dealing damage over time to anyone caught in it. Due to it persisting in a spot long after he's been there, Sinja's objective is vastly different from that of any other champion, to avoid direct confrontation with his opponent and instead have them die a slow and painful death. Naturally, this ability goes against the general experience of the game, but at the same time, how many of us really lose sleep at night over his Q? Not really that many, even if it could be considered badly designed according to League's principles. As per usual, my approach to this series is based on how the ability functions in a vacuum as well as in the context of the champion's kit. Depending on when you watch this, some of the champions on this list might be performing very well or very poorly, which can skew one's perceptions of the ability in question. Previously, I thought about abilities that possess an inordinate amount of the champion's power budget in one single attack, or have properties that discourage or flat out remove interactions. That was the basis for the first two episodes. For this episode, we're going to talk about the oddball ones. For a title where most characters have only 4 buttons to press, it's rare to encounter a dead ability. Obviously, for a game like Smash Bros, the likelihood is far greater as each fighter has 5 times the amount of usable moves. That being said, it's not impossible. While there's no such thing as an abject useless ability in this game, there are some that aren't all that conducive to what the champion is trying to accomplish, whether it's because the ability itself is underwhelming to use, or if its existence as a whole feels largely out of place, as if you could extract it out of their kit entirely and they would still be able to do more or less the same things. Abilities like these can be hard to pinpoint. Like I said before, it depends on how far you're willing to split hairs over technicalities. Yasuo's wind wall is an extremely potent resource and very much needed for him to function comfortably, but if you were being really pedantic about it, it's not a necessity. It doesn't prevent him from using last breath or set of combos in place. A lot of champions have that one ability that's just kind of extra. Fiora's Riposte, Irelia's Defiant Dance, Kha'Zix's Void Spike, Nidalee's Primal Surge, and so on. So the choices for today will likely be met with controversy, but then again, that's the fun of these videos. I'm sure by now a lot of people know me for having no shortage of hot takes, and you know what? I can say whatever the hell I want. Anyways, enough rambling, let's begin. Starting with the 2 honorable or dishonorable mentions. KALISTA is a very unique marksman, known for performing quick sidesteps with each attack and racking up huge amounts of spears for backloaded burst damage. But a W Sentinel is kind of weird to have, especially on a short-range marksman with a below-average neutral game. The ability has a passive and an active, the former to her credit being quite significant. If she and her soulbound ally attack the same target within 4 seconds, they suffer a large chunk of magic damage. Not bad to have for short traits. The active is where things become incongruous. She summons a ghost that patrols a set area, granting a small amount of vision. I was very much considering putting this as one of the premier 5, but decided against it since vision is one of the most critical mechanics to League. For all intents and purposes, it's a downgrade to Ashe's Hawkshot in almost every way, and unlike Ashe, who's a utility marksman with a very strong neutral game, KALISTA isn't one to play for control. She prefers action with a very powerful advantage state, so having something like Sentinel doesn't really harmonize with the rest of her kit. Most of the time it's only used for the passive damage. Jace runs into a similar situation with his hammer form W, Lightning Field. Perhaps it might just be a remnant of old champion design. Passively, it restores mana with every auto attack and hammer stance, a very high amount at max level 2, 16 per hit. If you're allowed to safely use his melee form during neutral, he can regenerate his mana back rather consistently, very much needed of course in light of having 6 abilities. The passive may be good, but the active is sort of It's the only ability with an AP ratio in his kit, and while the base damage caps out at 400, making it pretty good if he stays up close, it's definitely weird to see on a guy like him. I mean, pragmatically it helps his wave clear in the early game, but no one's freaking out about his W damage except minions, let's be honest. His mid game is largely in favor of his high burst damage and strong poke. In fact, most people straight up forget about Lightning Field, both the passive and active components, once he completes Muramana, because at that point, his mana issues are effectively gone. Alright, we're done with that, now to move on to the real stuff. This one's gonna scratch a few heads, so we'll start with Taric's Starlight Touch. Few tanks have the ability to heal themselves, let alone allies. Makes sense. After all, a 300 heal on them is much harder to tear through than a marksman with no armor or magic resist. Taric's healing is pretty underwhelming though for a lot of reasons. The ability works off a charge system. Upon cast, he consumes all charges to heal himself, his tethered ally, and anyone within the circle of either him or that ally. Now, if you think about healing on a support, it's usually tied to an enchanter who is able to administer it from a far distance like Soraka. Astral Infusion has a cast range of 550 and a very high amount of healing on a low cooldown at max rank. It may heal only one person, but it's a huge amount. Healing supports artificially increase the max health pool of whoever they're supporting, enough to where they can vastly reduce their vulnerability to burst damage. Starlight Touch doesn't do that very well. Many of you might have seen that one clip of Light Rocky healing Tyler 1 back to full HP simply by auto-attacking raptors and spamming Q with each attack. Looks impressive, but that's a very specific edge case where Taric can provide a huge amount of healing. It can only perform at its best when he's attacking something, and even then not by that much. Healing is designed to be most effective in neutral. That way you can sustain yourself from any poke damage or lane harass. On its own, it has a 15-second cooldown, meaning you're never going to be able to spam it unless you're using Bravado. A stark contrast to his old Q, Imbue, which healed himself and an ally for a very solid amount, on top of having a far wider cast range. Hypothetically, if you were to get a 5 charge heal on your entire team, then Taric's restorative capabilities overshadow Yuumi, Soraka, and Sona's by leaps and bounds. But it's the latter three's consistency in keeping their teammates alive that make them more sought after. Conceptually, it's a good spell. I think its interactions with himself and his tethered ally make for an interesting experience, but I mean, the champion as a whole has a ton of problems. His Q is just the big one that I think needs revision. Moving on, we have Lilia's W. You can't get me to say the ability name without cringing, so I'll just call it her W for the rest of my life. I made a video on why no one plays Lilia not too long ago, talking about her playstyle being that of a hit and run attacker. She likes to scamper around just outside of most melee champions' threat bubbles with her high mobility. On the other hand, her W always felt weird. It's very simple. After a delay, she smashes the targeted area slightly ahead of her for magic damage. Enemies caught in the center take triple that amount. Unlike Taric, whose Q is good in theory but bad in practice, Lilia's W has its uses in practice, but theoretically I think it fell short. The damage from landing a sweet spot is no short of extraordinary. 450 base plus 105% ability power. You get hit by this, you're probably dead. And she has the perfect ability to set you up for that, her ultimate. So she does have built-in setup to ensure that you can make full use of this attack. But where I feel this is poorly designed is the same reason as KALISTA. It's weird to see this type of ability on a character like her. For one, it is a fixed cast time. Looming Blows and Lilting Lullaby can be cast while moving so as not to disrupt her tempo, much like how Hecarim's Q and W have no cast time. Otherwise, it makes him feel unnecessarily clunky. But Lilia's W does. It travels a fixed distance with a long cast time, thus slowing her down and ironically making her really easy to hit during that time. I understand with this much damage concentrated into one ability, it would be overpowered to let her use this while moving. Even so, when I made a Why No One Plays episode, I got a few comments pointing out her W's lack of cohesion with the rest of her kit besides serving as a quick burst. It would feel a lot better to use, I think, if its dash range was formulated like Warwick's ultimate, where the faster she moves, the further she can go with it. Or if its cast time was reduced based on how high her movement speed is. Again, it needs to have a long cast time for how much damage it does, but then why give that to a champion with extremely high tempo? Looks like it would have made more sense on a Juggernaut. Let's go to the next ability for the time being. Zoe's Spell Thief in and of itself is also a good ability. Whenever casting Spell Thief or one of her own summoner spells, she gains a huge surge of movement speed and 3 bubbles that orbit her for the next 10 seconds, automatically damaging nearby enemies the same way Ahri's Foxfire does. Passively, whenever enemy champions cast a summoner spell or item active, they drop a spell shard that Zoe can pick up, allowing her to pull some shotgun shenanigans and use that very same active. So basically, if the circumstances are perfect, she can flash up to 6 times in one single sitting. The bad thing about Spell Thief is that by no means is it conducive to her playstyle apart from the sheer amount of value it brings to the table for her. Spell Thief is able to cast a wide variety of active items, not just summoner spells. She can use things like Everfrost, Score Drinker, Rocket Belt, Locket, Prowler's Claw, Zanya's Hourglass even. She can even steal Cleanse, Heal, Teleport, Flash, Ignite, so many different things. Her W punishes you for using summons or actives. It's extremely devastating when used optimally. But that's not her main objective. Zoe's the hybrid between the Artillery and Burst Mage subclasses. She likes to sling her Q and E using Portal Jump to temporarily extend her effective range. Spell Thief can be deleted from her kit and that won't make her EQ combo any less devastating. Here's the thing, both Artillery and Burst Mages share a common weakness, a very weak disadvantage state, meaning if you're able to close the gap and strike first, they're very easy targets to take down. Xerath, Vel'Koz, Lux, Vhagar, Twisted Fate will crumble to pieces if you're up in their face. Zoe's Spell Thief prevents you from being able to do that to some extent. You can't flash into her as she can just pick up your spell shard and flash away, compounded by the long-lasting high movement speed buff she gets. She may not be nearly as slippery as that of Ahri, but Spell Thief feels very superfluous. She's a long-range sniper who just so happens to be able to use summoner spells. It's not a core part of her win condition as opposed to Silas's, who doesn't have an ultimate of his own, thus he needs to copy others. Okay, second to last ability we have the newly reworked Dr. Mundo's Heart Zapper. I'm gonna level with you guys, this ability is just straight up booty cheeks, like even more than anyone else on this list. You can remove his W from the game and he won't even notice that it's gone. Mundo's W, old and new, were both hot garbage. At first glance, it might seem like a way to surprise opponents by instantly healing a large chunk of health lost right before you're about to die. But here's why it's so much worse than it looks. For 4 seconds, he deals magic damage to enemies around him and stores a percentage of the damage taken as gray health, much like Tahm Kench's thick skin. The dot damage has zero scaling whatsoever, similar to Jace's lightning field. It's really just there for the sake of being there. Upon recast or after the full duration, he explodes, damaging all enemies and healing for a portion of the gray health stored. 50% if at least one enemy was hit, increased to a full refund if a champion or a large monster was hit. So first off, the damage. At max level it's 80 base plus 7% bonus health. To give you an idea of how little that is, Mundo has 2100 base health at level 18 and usually picks up about 2500 more health through items. 7% of 2500 is 175, so a 6 item Mundo will basically do only 2500 damage with Heart Zapper. At that point, that's less than how much you would do with a single auto attack. The healing might seem impressive, but even that isn't that great. It's virtually non-existent in the early game, you'd be lucky to restore maybe 50 to 80 HP. And in the late game, there's a high chance you're slammed with 60% grievous wounds. Even if you get the full heal, 40% of 45 is 18%. This is at level 18. I'm fully aware that you can't give it a whole lot of damage, what with how much he does with Q, E, and his ultimate damage bonus. But the fact that Heart Zapper is a dead ability until like 30 minutes into a game on a champion that was reworked in 2021 is kinda stupid. Mind you, he's a stat checker, but still, no two ways about it. In fact, I've seen a few Mundo players who straight up didn't even put a point into Heart Zapper until level 13. They just maxed Q and E first. Last but not least, Ryze's Realm Warp. Hear me out. The amount of insane macro plays you can pull off with this ability puts it in super ultimate territory. But there are two things about it that make me want to feature it for this video. One, excluding anything pertaining to lore, it kinda just came out of nowhere considering every ultimate he had before was a self buff. And two, it's way too powerful of an ability to exist in this game. Realm Warp's passive component increases the bonus damage on Overload, which, let's be honest, is the only reason you would put points into this in solo queue. The active is a 2-second channel upon which all allied units within the portal blink to the destination. Global ultimates require a mountain of restrictions or conditions to be balanced due to how important map positioning is in League. Being able to teleport your entire team a far distance is beyond insane. It's why it barely sends you anywhere, only 3000 units as opposed to Twisted Fates or Pantheon's 5500. If it was any higher, Realm Warp would be turbo busted. Sadly, in solo queue you don't really get all that many chances to use it for those crazy game-winning plays, as you need to somehow communicate to your entire team quickly enough to get them to all stand still and like sneak Baron or backdoor the enemy Nexus while they're taking Elder. By itself, it's a dead ability, essentially making Ryze a champion with only Q, W, and E to his name. Realm Warp is just too good of an ability on paper. It feels like something I would see from Dota 2. The range is too short to really save you all that much time for fancy plays, but you can't make it any longer than that. Consequently, it ends up just being something you put points into for more Q damage. There might be one instance where you pull off the sneakiest Baron call or use it to gank bot, but Ryze's ultimate is one of the most suppressed abilities in the game, which is why I think it's badly designed. I made a fun little video a while back theorizing my own rework for Ryze, which involved doing away with Realm Warp entirely and reverting his ultimate back into a self buff, because that to me is what ruined his balance in the first place. Alright, there you have it. This will likely be the last episode of badly designed abilities for a while. Even if you guys want to see a 4th, I think we'd be pushing the envelope with that. However, to those of you who made it all the way to the end, I do have a surprise for you. I'll be making a 3rd episode on hated champions as well, so stay tuned for that. There's a few more characters that grind my gears, and it's been a minute since the last one, but for the time being, let me know your own thoughts on the 7 abilities I chose for this episode if you agree or disagree with them. I'd like to remind you once again that my focus for part 3 was to see which ones felt out of place or disconnected from their regular kit in some way. I know there's a lot I could have talked about, but I think these ones were the biggest offenders. That, and they were really the only ones I could think of at the time. I did have half a mind to put Teemo's W in here, but it's actually a lot better than people give it credit for. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, please be sure to leave a like and subscribe. Consider following me on Twitter, joining my Discord server, and checking out my previous 2 episodes on badly designed abilities. But for now, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon for the next one. Take care.